They say the universe is ruled by cold logic, calculated risks, and superior firepower. The high councils of the galaxy believe that emotions are a weakness, a glitch in the biological code that must be purged to achieve perfection. But the galaxy had never accounted for the humans, the Deathworlders from a toxic high-gravity rock called Terra. When an alien princess hiding for a decade inside a suit of scarred power armor is forced to team up with a human spy she was hired to kill, she learns a terrifying truth. She discovers that while logic might win battles, it is human stubbornness, fueled by raw, chaotic emotion, that burns down empires. What happens when a fugitive queen realizes her most dangerous weapon isn't her plasma rifle, but the fragile, squishy human standing beside her who just decided she is part of his pack? Welcome back to Echoes of Sci-Fi. I'm your narrator, and today we are decrypting a file that the Galactic Syndicate tried desperately to delete. This is a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the terrifying resilience of humanity. Before we initiate the launch sequence, make sure to smash that like button. It helps our signal reach the outer rim. If you haven't already, subscribe and ring the notification bell to officially join our crew. I want to know where my fellow Deathworlders are stationed, so drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's engage the warp drive. The rain on Sepulchre Prime didn't just fall, it chewed through everything it touched. It came down in heavy oily sheets that smelled of sulfur, old copper, and spent plasma rounds. It slicked the skeletal ruins of a civilization that had been bombed into extinction 3 centuries ago, clearing the way for the profitable, endless wars of the current era. This moon was nothing more than a proxy battlefield, a graveyard where the galactic superpowers settled their petty disputes with mercenaries and autonomous machines so that the manicured lawns of their home worlds remained green and pristine. High above the mud-choked streets, perched atop the crumbling stone gargoyle of a ruined cathedral, sat a figure that looked more like a shadow than a soldier. Her name was Kaylin, though to the galaxy she was just another faceless mercenary in a suit of matte black composite armor. Her gear was scarred by 100 different calibers, a testament to a decade of survival in the worst hellholes the galaxy had to offer. She was a silhouette, a void in the visual spectrum, motionless against the corrosive storm. Inside the suit, the only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of her internal life support, barely audible over the roar of the downpour outside. She adjusted the magnification on her tactical visor, the HUD cycling through spectrums until it locked onto a heat signature 200 yards below. A figure was moving through the debris. He was human. To an alien observer, he looked unimpressive, soft skin, no natural armor, no claws. But Kaylin knew better. The human moved with a heavy, purposeful gait, unaccustomed to the light 0.8 gravity of this moon. He was built for a world with crushing gravity, a death world called Earth. He wore standard-issue scavenger gear, a ragged poncho draped over kinetic plating that had seen better days, but he didn't move like a scavenger. He checked corners. He watched the sightlines. He moved like a ghost. Text flashed in amber across Kaylin's heads-up display. Target ID, Jax. Wanted for espionage, data theft, and high treason against the Syndicate. The bounty attached to his head was enough to buy a small moon in the outer rim. Kaylin tightened her grip on her magnetic rifle. This was supposed to be a simple job. Intercept. Incapacitate. Extract. She had done it 1,000 times before. She was the best hunter in the sector precisely because she didn't ask questions and she didn't make mistakes. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet for a fraction of a second before the recyclers scrubbed it away. Then she moved. She leaped from the cathedral spire, descending 2 stories in absolute silence. Her gravity boots flared with blue ionization just microseconds before impact, cushioning the landing so she hit the pavement 10 feet behind him with barely a whisper. But the human was fast. Terrifyingly fast. Jax spun around before Kaylin had even fully straightened up. His reflexes were impressive for a biological entity. He had a kinetic pulse pistol drawn and leveled at her chest in the span of a single heartbeat. "You are fast, human," Kaylin thought, though her external speakers projected a deep, synthesized growl designed to mask her gender and her species. "But you aren't fast enough." "Drop the weapon," she commanded. The voice modulator made the words sound metallic, scraping against the thunder rolling overhead. Jax didn't drop it. He narrowed his eyes, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hood. Under the grit and the 5-day stubble, he looked exhausted. It was the specific kind of exhaustion Kaylin had seen in Deathworlders before. A bone-deep weariness of a man who had been running for a very long time, fueled only by spite and caffeine. "I can't do that," Jax shouted over the howling wind. "I have somewhere to be." You have a cell waiting for you in the Citadel, Kaelin replied. She took a step forward, her armor servo motors whining menacingly. Jax shifted his stance, his heavy combat boots sliding slightly in the thick mud. He glanced past her, toward the alleyway she had just blocked. Look, buddy. I don't know who paid you, but I can double it. Just let me walk away. Kaelin raised her rifle. I am not a mercenary you can bribe. She prepared to fire a stun bolt, a localized shockwave that would scramble his nervous system for an hour. It was clean. It was efficient. Then the rubble to her left shifted. A child, no older than 6 cycles, scrambled out from a hole in the ruined wall. The creature was a local scavenger species, small and furred, clutching a piece of scrap metal like it was a diamond. The child froze, eyes wide with terror, caught directly in the crossfire between the armored giant and the human operative. At that exact moment, the war in the distance decided to intervene. A stray mortar shell from the front line whistled overhead. It fell short, slamming into the building directly above them. The structure groaned, and tons of ferroconcrete detached from the facade, plummeting straight toward the child. Kaelin's battle computer calculated the trajectory instantly. She was safe. The human was safe. The child was dead. The mission parameters were clear: capture the target. Collateral damage was irrelevant. But she didn't fire. In the split second before the debris hit, the human did something that defied all logic. Jax didn't lunge for cover. He didn't protect himself. He lunged for the child. He tackled the small creature, curling his body around it, turning his unarmored back to the falling stone. The wall collapsed with a deafening crash, burying the street in a cloud of choking dust. Kaelin stood frozen, her rifle lowered. The logic of the mercenary world, the cold, hard calculus she lived by, dictated that she should have stunned him while he was distracted. She should have capitalized on his tactical error. Compassion was a tactical error. The dust began to settle. A pile of rubble lay where the human had been. Kaelin deactivated her rifle's safety, stepping cautiously toward the mound. Had he killed himself to save a scavenger? It was illogical. It was stupid. The stones shifted. Jax groaned, pushing a massive slab of concrete off his legs. He was battered, his poncho torn, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. Humans were dense, their bone density evolved to survive high-impact trauma. Beneath him, the alien child squirmed, terrified but unharmed. Go. Jax rasped, shoving the kid toward the ruins. Get out of here. The child scrambled away into the darkness. Jax slumped back against the debris, coughing and clutching his ribs. He looked up at Kaelin, wiping blood from his eye. He laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. Well, are you going to shoot me or are you just enjoying the view? Kaelin stared at him. The targeting reticle on her HUD hovered over his chest, turning green. He was helpless. Why? She asked, her synthesized voice cracking with genuine confusion. Why risk the mission for a local? Jax spat a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the pavement. Because he's a kid. And we aren't monsters. The word struck her like a physical blow. We aren't monsters. She had spent 10 years convincing herself that she was exactly that. A weapon, a suit of armor, a thing that ended lives for currency. She hesitated. That hesitation cost her everything. Jax moved. He pulled a small spherical device from his belt, not a grenade but a wide-spectrum frequency jammer. He slammed it against the magnetized joint of her knee armor. A high-pitched squeal erupted, overloading the servo motors in her leg. Kaelin stumbled, her armor locking up. Jax rolled to his feet, ignoring his injuries, and swung a heavy metal pipe he had pulled from the rubble. He struck her helmet, hard. The impact shattered her optical sensors. Her HUD winked out, leaving her blind inside the metal shell. Kaelin ripped the helmet off, gasping as the humid, toxic air of Sepulchre Prime hit her skin. She spun around, long violet hair whipping in the wind, her silver eyes blazing with fury. Jax stood 6 feet away, the pipe raised for another strike, but he froze. The pipe lowered slowly. His eyes widened. He took in the features she had hidden for a decade. The skin the color of deep oceanic teal, the hair that defied gravity slightly, shimmering with static, and the bioluminescent markings that traced the line of her jaw. You. Jax breathed. You aren't a mercenary. Kaelin bared her teeth, sharp, elegant canines. I am the last thing you will ever see if you don't surrender. Jax took a step back, but it wasn't out of fear. It was recognition. I saw those markings in the archives. The royal crest. You're Etherean. You're the princess. Kaelin stiffened. The title was a ghost she thought she had buried. I am no one, she snarled. Before Jax could respond, the sky turned white. There was no sound at first, just a blinding flash that vaporized the rain instantly. Then came the roar, a sonic boom that shook the very bedrock of the moon. High above the clouds, the blackened shapes of warships descended, breaking through the atmosphere like jagged knives. These were not the trade ships of the corporations. These were sleek, predatory destroyers. Orbital strike. Jax yelled, his voice barely audible over the rumbling earth. Kalen looked up. The clouds were burning. A lance of plasma energy struck the city center 3 miles away, sending a shockwave of fire tearing through the streets. They're leveling the grid, Kalen shouted. We have to move. Jax looked at her, then at the wall of fire rushing toward them. Truce, he yelled. Kalen looked at the human who had saved a child, then at the approaching death. Truce, she agreed. She grabbed him by the harness of his vest, her armor partially rebooted, humming with power, and dragged him toward a gaping maw in the street, an entrance to the old subterranean maglev tunnels. They dived into the darkness just as the firestorm consumed the street above. The tunnels were ancient, smelling of rust and stagnant water. Emergency lights flickered in dying amber loops, casting long, dancing shadows against the curved walls. Kalen and Jax ran, their footsteps echoing in the hollow space. The shockwaves from the surface bombardment caused dust to rain down from the ceiling. Every few seconds the ground lurched, threatening to throw them off balance. Who are they? Jax demanded, sprinting alongside her. Who is hitting us? I don't know, Kalen replied, checking the power levels on her gauntlet. Those ships didn't broadcast an identification code. They're wiping the board. They're cleaning up loose ends, Jax said grimly. Which means they're here for one of us. Probably me, Kalen glanced at him. Your ego is substantial, human. Perhaps they are here for the royalty you accused me of being, she added. Jax smirked despite the danger. So you admit it? Princess Kalen. The one who died in the siege of Altair. I died, Kalen said coldly. Who you see is a ghost. Do not speak that name again. They reached a junction. To the left, a collapsed tunnel blocked the path. To the right, a service corridor stretched into gloom. Right? Jax said, pointing. That leads to the spaceport maintenance hangars. If there's a ship left on this rock, it'll be there. They turned the corner and skidded to a halt. Blocking the corridor were 3 warbits, heavy quadrupedal machines with Gatling cannons mounted on their dorsal plating. Their optical sensors cycled from patrol yellow to combat red the moment they detected movement. Down? Kalen yelled. She shoved Jax behind a rusted pillar just as the air filled with high-velocity rounds. Concrete chips exploded around them like shrapnel. Kalen drew a kinetic blade from her thigh holster. The blade hummed, glowing with a purple energy edge. Cover me, she ordered. With what? Harsh language. Jax yelled, checking his empty pistol. Improvise. Kalen broke cover. She moved with a fluid grace that defied the bulk of her armor. She ran along the side of the tunnel, dodging the tracking fire of the first bot. She landed on its back, driving the kinetic blade through its central processor. The machine shrieked and collapsed in a shower of sparks. The other 2 bots swiveled to track her. Jax leaned out from behind the pillar and hurled a piece of scrap metal at the sensors of the second bot. It clanged loudly, confusing the machine's targeting logic for a split second. It was enough. Kalen rolled under the bot's chassis and severed its hydraulic lines. It slumped forward lifeless. The third bot, however, was quicker. As Kalen rose, it swung a massive mechanical limb, catching her in the chest. The impact threw her backward like a ragdoll. She slammed into the tunnel wall with a sickening crunch. The armor held her ribs together, but the structural integrity warning screamed in her ears. The bot advanced, charging its main cannon. Jax didn't think. He sprinted from cover, slid across the slick floor, and jammed the metal pipe directly into the bot's ammunition feed mechanism. The gun jammed. The bot lurched, trying to clear the obstruction. Kalen recovered. She lunged forward, driving her blade through the bot's optical array. The machine died, crashing to the floor with a metallic thud. Silence returned to the tunnel, broken only by the heavy breathing of the 2 combatants. Kalen leaned against the wall, clutching her chest. Her armor was smoking. Sparks showered from the damaged chest plate. Are you okay? Jax asked, walking over, his face etched with concern. That was a heavy hit. I am fine, Kalen winced, trying to straighten up. It will take more than a tin can to kill me. She took a step and stumbled. The latching mechanism on her breastplate, damaged by the blow, gave way with a sharp hiss. The heavy armor plating on her torso split open and fell away, dangling by a single wire. Beneath the armor, she wore only a thin, form-fitting mesh suit designed to interface with the machine. The suit was translucent in places, revealing the bioluminescent glow of her teal skin underneath, the soft curve of her form, and the intricate, glowing constellations of her royal markings running down her sternum. Kaylin gasped, her hands flying up to cover herself, though the mesh hid the specifics. The intimacy of the exposure was shocking in the cold, industrial tunnel. "Don't look human," she yelled, her voice echoing, panicked and strangely high-pitched compared to her modulator. Jax froze. He had been reaching out to steady her, but he snapped his hand back as if burned. He turned his head sharply to the side, staring intently at a rusted pipe on the wall. "I am not looking," he promised, holding his hands up in surrender. "I'm looking at the wall. A very interesting wall. Lots of rust." But Kaylin had seen it. In that fraction of a second before he turned, his eyes had widened. He had seen the glow. He had seen the woman beneath the soldier. And the look in his eyes hadn't been the leering hunger of the mercenaries she worked with. It was fascination. It was awe. Kaylin hastily grabbed the loose breastplate and slammed it back into place, forcing the emergency magnetic seals to engage. It held but barely. Her face, usually a cool teal, was flushed a darker shade of violet, an alien blush. "You can turn around now," she muttered, adjusting her pauldrons, regaining her composure with visible effort. Jax turned back slowly, keeping his eyes strictly on her face. He offered a small, crooked smirk. "Just for the record, the glowing? It's hard to miss." Kaylin glared at him, but there was no heat in it. "If you speak of it, I will cut out your tongue." "Noted," Jax said. "But seriously, are you hurt?" "Just my pride," she said, pushing past him. "Let us move. The bombardment is getting closer." They ran for another 10 minutes until the tunnel opened up into a vast underground hangar. Most of the bays were empty, looted years ago, but in the far corner, a decommissioned dropship sat on dusty landing struts. It was an old model, bulky and ugly, but the engine intake ports were clear. "That is our ride," Jax said. They sprinted across the hangar floor just as the ceiling above them began to crack, debris raining down as the bombardment pulverized the surface directly overhead. Kaylin ripped the hatch open and they scrambled into the cockpit. Jax jumped into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. "Do you know how to fly this relic?" Kaylin asked, strapping herself into the co-pilot's seat. "I can fly anything with wings," Jax said. "And some things without them. Hang on." He punched the ignition. The engines coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. The dropship shuddered, lifting off the deck just as a massive slab of the ceiling crashed down exactly where they had been standing seconds before. Jax slammed the throttle forward. The ship shot out of the hangar exit, blasting into the stormy sky of Sepulchre Prime. The G-force pressed them into their seats. Through the viewport, Kaylin saw the devastation. The city was gone. The jungle was burning. The black warships in orbit were firing continuously, turning the moon into a glass marble. They broke the atmosphere, shaking violently as they passed through the cloud layer. The stars appeared, cold and indifferent. Jax maneuvered the ship through the debris field of destroyed satellites, running dark to avoid detection. Once they were clear of the gravity well, he engaged the warp drive. The stars stretched into lines of light, and the violence of the moon vanished behind them. Silence filled the cockpit. The only sound was the hum of the reactor. Jax exhaled a long, shaky breath and slumped back in his seat. "That was close," he muttered. Kaylin unbuckled her harness. She stood up, the damaged armor clicking softly. She looked at Jax, the human who had saved a child, who had fought beside her, who had seen her vulnerability and turned away out of respect. She drew her kinetic blade. Jax tensed, watching her reflection in the console glass. He didn't turn around. "You aren't going to kill me, princess," he said. Kaylin placed the tip of the blade against the back of his seat, close to his neck. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't. You know who I am. You are a spy. You are a liability." Jax turned the chair slowly to face her. The blade was inches from his throat. He looked up at her, his brown eyes calm. "Because I saved your life back there," he said softly. "And you saved mine. That means something. Even in a war like this." Kaylin held his gaze. The silver of her eyes swirled like liquid mercury. She thought of the child. She thought of the way he had protected her when her armor failed. She deactivated the blade with a snap. The energy field vanished. She sheathed the hilt at her hip. Consider your debt paid, human, she said, her voice returning to its icy regal cadence. But know this, if you betray me, if you sell my secret to the highest bidder, I will find you. And next time, she leaned in, I won't hesitate. Jax smiled, the tension leaving his shoulders. I wouldn't dream of it. Besides, you're stuck with me. We are in deep space with a stolen ship and half the galaxy trying to kill us. Where are we going? He asked. Kaelin looked out at the swirling vortex of hyperspace. She felt the weight of her exile, the pain of her past, and the terrifying uncertainty of the future. Away, she said. We're going away. She sat back down, staring at the console. She could feel his eyes on her, curious and alive. For the first time in years she was not alone. And for a terrifying moment she realized she didn't want to be. The ship hurtled onward into the dark, carrying a princess who was trying to forget, and a spy who was trying to remember. They were bound together by a secret that could burn the galaxy down. The air on the jungle moon of Xylos was heavy enough to drown in. It tasted of fermented nectar, rotting vegetation, and the kind of humidity that made your lungs feel like they were full of wet cotton. Massive canopy trees, twisting toward the violet sky like the gnarled fingers of buried giants, blocked out most of the sunlight, leaving the forest floor bathed in a perpetual bioluminescent twilight. Strange insects with translucent wings buzzed in the gloom, their chirps synchronizing like a mechanical heartbeat that echoed through the mist. Kaelin sat on a moss-covered log, her armor stripped down to the waist to allow the humid air to cool her overheating core systems. She was cleaning the components of her magnetic rifle with methodical, military precision, her teal hands moving with the grace of a surgeon. Her glowing silver eyes, however, were fixed on the human man sitting 6 feet away. Jax was bound by his wrists to the thick, woody root of a star fern. The carbon fiber cord was tight but not cruel. He looked ragged. The humidity had plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and the cut above his eye from their escape on Sepulchre Prime had scabbed over in an angry red line. Yet he didn't look defeated. He watched her with a mixture of weariness and analytical curiosity, his chest rising and falling steadily despite the oppressive heat that would have incapacitated most species. That was the thing about Deathworlders, put them in hell and they just start measuring the drapes. You are staring again, Kaelin said, her voice low, stripped of the synthesized modulator she usually wore. It was a rich, melodic sound, alien and resonant, but it carried an edge of steel. Hard not to, Jax replied, testing the strength of his bindings for the 100th time. It's not every day I get kidnapped by a dead woman. Kaelin paused, a cleaning rag hovering over the rifle's emitter coil. I am not dead. Obviously, Jax quipped. To the galaxy you are, he countered. He shifted, trying to find a comfortable spot on the route. I've been running the numbers in my head since we left the moon. The crest on your chest. The specific combat style, heavy infantry tactics mixed with royal dueling forms. And the timeline fits perfectly. Princess Kaelin of House Etheria disappears 10 years ago during the Night of Long Knives. She is presumed disintegrated along with her entire bloodline. Kaelin set the rifle down. The metal clinked softly against the stone. You are clever for a spy, she said, her voice dropping an octave. But clever men often die young. Jax ignored the threat. It was a purge. That's what the history books say. A rival house got greedy, wiped out the competition. Standard imperial politics. It was not politics, Kaelin snapped, her composure cracking for a fraction of a second. It was business. She stood up, pacing the small clearing. The movement caused the bioluminescent markings on her skin, the complex geometric tattoos of her people, to flare brighter, responding to her spike in adrenaline. My family wasn't killed because of a land dispute, she said, her voice tightening with a decade of suppressed rage. We were killed because my father, the king, planned to sign a peace treaty with the Terran coalition. He wanted to end the 50-year war. Jax went still. Peace is bad for profits. Kaelin turned to face him, her eyes burning like twin stars. Precisely. The war economy sustains 3 major alien empires and your own human corporations. Weapons manufacturing, mercenary contracts, reconstruction loans, orbital shipyards. Peace would have crashed the galactic market. So, a consortium of noble houses and human board members conspired to remove the obstacle. She looked away, staring into the dense, dark jungle. They hired assassins. They burned my home. They slaughtered my kin while they slept. I survived only because my personal guard threw me into a refuse chute. I woke up in the garbage heaps of the lower city, burned and broken. I have spent 10 years crawling my way back up, hiding inside this armor, selling my violence to the very people who murdered my family. Silence settled over the camp, heavy and thick. Jax looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not the alien mercenary but the woman carrying a mountain of ashes on her back. "I know," he said softly. Kalen glanced back at him, confused. "You know nothing of my life, human?" "I know about the conspiracy," Jax corrected. "That's why I was on Sepulchre Prime. That's why the Syndicate put a bounty on my head." He leaned forward as much as the cords allowed. "I was an intelligence analyst. 6 months ago, my team intercepted an encrypted ledger from a derelict courier ship. It detailed the money trail. Trillions of credits funneled from the war zones back to shell companies owned by the high nobles and Earth executives. We found the names. We found the proof that the war is being artificially prolonged." Kalen walked closer to him, her expression unreadable. "What happened to the data?" "I hid it," Jack said. "But they found us before we could broadcast it. My team, they didn't make it. I'm the only one left." Kalen stared at him. The realization shifted the air between them. They were not captor and captive. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, stranded on the same hostile shore. She drew her knife. Jax flinched instinctively, but Kalen did not strike him. She knelt and sliced through the carbon fiber cords binding his wrists. Jax rubbed his chafed skin, looking up at her in surprise. "We share an enemy, Jax," Kalen said, sheathing the blade with a sharp click. "And I do not have enough allies to waste one who knows the truth." Jax stood up, stretching his arms, his joints popping. "Does this mean we're friends now, Princess?" "It means I won't kill you today," Kalen said, turning back to her gear. "Do not push your luck." She tossed him a nutrient bar from her pack. "We move at dusk. The bounty hunters tracking your ship's transponder won't be far behind." As if summoned by her words, a high-pitched whine cut through the jungle cacophony. It was the sound of repulsor engines, close and getting closer. Kalen froze. Her head snapped toward the north. Too late. Jax was already moving, stomping out the small, smokeless fire they had risked. "How many?" Kalen grabbed her helmet, jamming it onto her head. The HUD flickered to life, thermal sensors sweeping the canopy. 6 heat signatures. Heavy infantry. Approaching fast on Vector 39. A plasma bolt sizzled through the trees, incinerating a fern inches from Jax's head. "Cover!" Kalen roared. She slammed her shoulder into Jax, knocking him behind the thick trunk of a star fern just as the clearing exploded in a hail of laser fire. The air turned into a storm of superheated ozone and flying wood chips. "They're flanking." Jax yelled over the noise, drawing his pistol. Kalen engaged her armor's combat protocols. She broke cover, a blur of matte black motion. She didn't run away. She ran directly at them. She vaulted over a fallen log, her magnetic rifle spitting blue pulses of energy. 2 armored figures emerged from the foliage, Xylite trackers clad in heavy ceramic plating. Kalen took the first one in the chest, the kinetic force of the shot knocking him backward into a thorny bush. The second one leveled a scattergun at her. Kalen slid on the wet mud, passing under the discharge, and swept the mercenary's legs with a reinforced kick. As he fell, she drove the butt of her rifle into his helmet, shattering the faceplate. Jax was holding his own. He lacked her armor, but he used the jungle to his advantage in a way only a human could. While the alien stuck to the ground, Jax scrambled up the side of a tree, hanging by one arm like a primate, and fired 3 precise shots into the gap of a flanker's neck armor. The mercenary dropped. "Good shot, human," Kalen yelled, pinning another attacker against a rock. "I aim to please," Jax shouted back, dropping to the ground and rolling to avoid a thermal detonator. The fight was chaotic, a brutal dance of mud and energy. Kalen found herself fighting differently. Usually she was a solitary force watching her own back. But Jax was there. When a bounty hunter tried to blindside her with a vibroblade, Jax suppressed him with covering fire, forcing him to retreat. When Jax was pinned down by heavy repeater fire, Kalen drew the enemy's attention, acting as a tank to his striker. They moved in sync, anticipating each other's needs without speaking. It was an intoxicating rhythm, a chemistry born of adrenaline and shared competence. The final bounty hunter, a massive brute with a shoulder-mounted cannon, charged through the brush. Roaring, he swatted Jax aside like a doll, sending him crashing into a tree root. The brute raised a massive fist to crush Jax's skull. Kalen screamed, a primal, terrifying sound. She discarded her rifle and engaged her wrist blades. She leaped onto the brute's back, driving the energy blades into the power coupling on his spine. The brute convulsed, electricity arcing over his armor, and collapsed face-first into the mud. Silence returned to the jungle, broken only by the sizzling of overheated weapons and their own ragged breathing. Jax groaned, sitting up and checking his ribs. "Remind me to ask for a raise." Kaelin offered him a hand. He took it and she pulled him to his feet with surprising strength. For a moment they didn't let go. Her grip was firm, her metal gauntlet cool against his skin. "You fight well," she said, and there was genuine respect in her tone. "You aren't so bad yourself," Jax replied, breathless. A low, mechanical hum started overhead. "Drone?" Kaelin hissed. "Patrol class." She looked up. The canopy was thick, but gaps revealed the sky. A sleek, black seeker drone was hovering above the treeline, its sensor array sweeping the ground with green laser grids. It was hunting for thermal signatures. "We're too hot," Jax whispered. "The fight spiked our body temperatures. It'll see us." Kaelin scanned the area. There was nowhere to hide. No cave, no deep water. The drone descended, its sensors angling toward their clearing. "Trust me?" Kaelin asked. Jax looked at her. "Always." She grabbed the lapels of his jacket and shoved him back against the wide trunk of the tree. Before he could ask what she was doing, she pressed her body against his, covering him completely with her armor and her bulk. She reached up and deactivated her helmet, the faceplate retracting. Then she grabbed the back of his neck and pulled his face down to hers. "Kiss me," she commanded, her voice a breathless whisper. "What?" "Do it." It confuses the thermal outline. Two signatures become one amorphous blob. It looks like local fauna, a mating. The drone's hum grew louder. It was right above them. Jax didn't argue. He leaned in and crashed his lips against hers. It was supposed to be a tactical maneuver. It was supposed to be a deception. But the moment their skin touched, the logic evaporated. Her lips were cool, tasting of rain and adrenaline. She tasted alien, electric, a shock to his system that had nothing to do with the battle. Jax's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, eliminating the space between them. Kaelin gasped into his mouth, her fingers tangling in his damp hair. The danger of the drone faded into the background, replaced by the sudden, overwhelming proximity of the woman she had been hiding for a decade. The drone hovered for 10 agonizing seconds. Its lasers swept over the entangled figures at the base of the tree, finding no distinct combat signatures, only a massive heat source that registered as biological activity. It rotated its thrusters and moved on, continuing its sweep to the south. The hum faded. They broke apart, but only by an inch. They were both breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other. The rain began to fall again, a gentle drizzle that hissed on Kaelin's hot armor. Jax opened his eyes. "The drone is gone." "I know," Kaelin whispered. Her eyes were wide, the silver irises swirling with a chaotic mix of emotions. She pulled back abruptly, stepping away from him. She turned her back, fumbling with her helmet seals. We should keep moving. We need to put distance between us and the bodies." Jax watched her, his lips still tingling. "Yeah, moving. Good plan." They walked in silence for hours. The tension between them was no longer born of mistrust, but of something far more dangerous. By the time they made camp, night had truly fallen. They found a small, dry alcove beneath a rocky overhang overlooking a valley filled with glowing purple flora. 2 moons hung in the sky, one large and pale, the other small and blood-red. They built a small fire using heat stones to minimize the smoke. They sat on opposite sides of it, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows against the rock wall. Kaelin had removed her upper armor again to repair the damage from the fight. She wore only the mesh undersuit, her teal skin glowing softly in the dark. She looked ethereal, a creature of myth sitting in the dirt. Jax watched the flames. That was quick thinking back there. With the drone. Kaelin didn't look up from her repairs. It was a standard evasion protocol. "Standard," Jax repeated, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I must have missed that day in basic training." Kaelin stopped working. She looked at her hands, hands that had killed, hands that had destroyed. Hands that had just touched him with a gentleness she didn't know she possessed. "I haven't touched anyone in years," she said quietly. The confession hung in the air, fragile as glass. Jax looked up. "What do you mean?" I have been a suit of armor for 10 years, Jax. Since the exile I do not let people close. If they get close they see the truth. If they see the truth they die or I die. Physical contact is a liability." She hugged her knees to her chest, the glowing markings on her arms dimming slightly, reflecting her sadness. I forgot what it felt like to be held. Even for a lie. Jack stood up. He walked around the fire. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to tell him to stop, to draw a weapon, to put the wall back up. She didn't. He sat down next to her, close enough that he could feel the radiant heat of her alien physiology. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of violet hair away from her face, tucking it behind her pointed ear. You aren't alone anymore, Kaylin, he whispered. She shuddered at his touch. She turned her face into his hand, closing her eyes. The contact sent a jolt through her that was almost painful in its intensity. You do not know what you are doing, she warned, her voice trembling. My species, we are not like you. We do not just touch skin. We bond. If I let you in. I'm not afraid, Jack said. Kaylin opened her eyes. They were luminous, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. She leaned in, her lips inches from his. She hesitated, the fear of a decade warring with a hunger that was consuming her. If I start, she whispered, her breath hitching, I won't stop. Jax looked deep into her silver eyes, seeing the galaxy of pain and hope she carried. He placed his hand on the back of her neck, pulling her forward. Then don't stop. Kaylin kissed him, and this time it wasn't a deception. It was a surrender. She pushed him back against the stone floor of the alcove, her body covering his. As their skin connected, Jax gasped. It wasn't just physical sensation. It was a flood of static electricity that bypassed his nerves and went straight to his mind. He felt her. Not just the weight of her body, but flashes of memory exploded behind his eyes. A crystal palace burning. The smell of ozone and blood. The screaming of a child who was also her. The cold, hard silence of deep space. He felt her loneliness, a vast, crushing ocean that had drowned her for years. And she felt him. She felt his grief for his dead team, his cynical exhaustion, and the bright, burning ember of his attraction to her. Kaylin pulled the mesh suit from her shoulders, revealing her bare chest. Her skin was hot, feverish. The bioluminescent markings flared brilliant white, pulsing in time with her rapid heartbeat. Jax ran his hands down her back, tracing the line of her spine. Her skin felt like silk over steel, vibrating with energy. When he touched the royal sigil on her shoulder, she cried out, not in pain, but in a release of tension so ancient it sounded like a sob. She kissed his neck, his chest, her hands moving with a desperation that bordered on violence. She needed to be real. She needed to be anchored. Jax, she gasped, his name sounding like a prayer in her native tongue. He held her, grounding her storm. He kissed the tears that leaked from her silver eyes. The psychic connection deepened, blurring the lines between where he ended and she began. He felt her pleasure as his own, a cascading wave of colors, violet and gold, crashing through his mind. He felt her fear dissolve into trust. They moved together in the flickering firelight, a human exile and an alien princess, stripping away the layers of armor and lies until there was nothing left but the raw, glowing truth of two souls finding home in the dark. For the first time in 10 years, the jungle of Xylos was not a hostile battlefield. It was a sanctuary. And as Kaylin cried out in the final moments, clutching Jax as if he were the only solid thing in the universe, the twin moons above seemed to shine a little brighter, bearing witness to the spark that would eventually burn down an empire. The asteroid station known as Terminus 9 was a tumor of metal and rock clinging to the ragged edge of the neutral zone. It was a hollowed-out mining colony that had long ago exhausted its ore veins and now mined a far more volatile resource: secrets. The air inside the station's docking ring tasted of recycled oxygen, stale coolant and cheap, synthetic alcohol, a metallic tang that sat heavy on the tongue and burned the back of the throat. Neon signs in a dozen different alien scripts flickered and buzzed against the grimy bulkheads, advertising everything from illegal cybernetics to black market memory wipes. It was a place where the galaxy's refuse washed up, where morality was a luxury no one could afford, and where a dead princess and a rogue spy could disappear into the noise. Kaylin moved through the crushing crowd with the fluid, predatory grace of a creature trying very hard to look harmless. She wore a heavy scavenger's cloak, the hood pulled low to obscure her face. Beneath the fabric, a localized distortion field, a piece of tech Jax had salvaged from their stolen dropship, blurred her features into a generic, forgettable smear for any facial recognition scanners. To the digital eye she was a glitch. To the naked eye she was just another dangerous shadow in a station full of them. But nothing could mask the tension radiating from her frame. Every muscle was coiled, ready to snap. Jax walked beside her, his hand hovering near the blaster pistol concealed in his jacket. He had ditched the poncho for the grease-stained jumpsuit of a reactor technician, a disguise that allowed him to blend into the background of the station's industrial underbelly. He looked like a man who fixed pipes and didn't ask questions. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The psychic bond that had been forged in the fire of the jungle moon was still there, humming like a live wire at the base of Kalen's skull. It wasn't just empathy, it was a constant stream of telemetry. She could feel his alertness, sharp and jagged, checking every shadow, assessing every threat in the crushing throng. It was a sensation that was both terrifying and comforting. For 10 years, her mind had been a fortress of silence, a cold void where she kept her secrets. Now, a window had been blown open, and through it came the steady, grounding warmth of his presence. He was her anchor in the sensory overload of the station. "We are close," Jax murmured, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of a passing maglev train overhead. The contact said the entrance to the deep archive is behind the cooling vents of Sector 4. Kalen nodded slightly, keeping her head down. "Keep moving. That patrol drone is scanning for biosignatures." They ducked into a narrow alleyway lined with steam pipes that hissed and rattled like dying beasts. The station was a labyrinth of illicit trade. Kalen saw a crate of stolen military-grade optics being exchanged for a bag of uncut gems. She saw a human deserter selling the launch codes to a supply frigate. It was a microcosm of the galaxy she despised, a place where loyalty was a currency that depreciated by the hour. They reached Sector 4, a derelict industrial zone where the artificial gravity plating was glitchy, making every step feel slightly too light, like walking on the moon's surface. The entrance to the archive was exactly where Jax's intel said it would be, a blast door welded shut, hidden behind a massive, spinning intake fan. Jax knelt by the control panel, pulling a bypass kit from his tool belt. "This will take a minute. The encryption is archaic but it's layered. Whoever built this place was paranoid." Kalen stood guard, her back to him, watching the alley entrance. Her hand rested on the hilt of her kinetic blade beneath her cloak. "Do not underestimate it, Jax. The broker who runs this archive preserves secrets that empires kill to keep buried." "I'm hurt," Jax whispered, his fingers flying over the keypad. "You think I would be sloppy?" A grin was evident in his voice, even though she couldn't see his face. The door hissed, the locking mechanism groaning in protest as centuries of rust gave way. The heavy steel slab slid open, revealing a dark, descending staircase that smelled of ozone and dry rot. "Ladies first," Jax said, gesturing with mock chivalry. Kalen stepped into the dark, her night vision adjusting instantly. They descended into the bowels of the asteroid. The noise of the market faded, replaced by the deep, rhythmic thrum of high-capacity server banks. The archive was a cavernous room carved directly into the rock. It was freezing. The temperature was kept near absolute zero to preserve the endless rows of data cores that lined the walls like coffins in a crypt. In the center of the room sat a single terminal, bathed in the harsh white light of a solitary lamp. Kalen approached the terminal. She pulled a data spike from her cloak and jammed it into the port. The screen flickered to life, scrolling through thousands of directories and alien syntax. "Search for House Etheria," she commanded, her voice tight. "Search for the timeline of the purge." "I'm cross-referencing with the financial records from the syndicate," Jax said, leaning over the console, his fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "If there's a link, it will be in the transaction logs." The screen froze. A file opened. It was a video recording, grainy and stamped with the encryption seal of the High Council. Kalen felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "Play it." The video expanded. It showed a dimly lit boardroom. Kalen recognized the decor immediately, the obsidian table, the banners of the royal houses. And she recognized the man sitting at the head of the table. It was not her father. It was her cousin, Lord Varkos. He looked younger in the footage, his face unscarred by the years of war that had followed. But his smile was the same, charming, vacuous, and cruel. Sitting across from him was a human general. A man Jax recognized with a sharp intake of breath. "General Kane," Jax whispered. "The architect of the Outer Rim pacification." "We have a deal then," Varkos said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I facilitate the removal of the king and his immediate heirs. In exchange, your syndicate supplies the insurrectionists with heavy ordnance and the rights to the iridium mines on Sepulchre Prime," General Kane added, leaning forward. "Of course," Varkos waved a hand dismissively. "But there is the matter of the surplus population. The war will create refugees." Kane smiled, a predator baring its teeth. "We have a market for that too. Biological components are in high demand for the new cyber soldier program, Kane continued, his voice devoid of humanity. We take the healthy ones. You keep the throne. The war continues. Profits rise. An order is maintained, Varkos agreed, raising a glass. The video ended. Kalen stood frozen. The silence in the archive was deafening. It wasn't just a coup. It was a harvest. Her family hadn't just been killed for power. They had been killed to turn her people into spare parts for human war machines. Jack stepped back from the console, his face pale. Kalen. I didn't know it went that deep. They sold us, Kalen whispered, the words scraping out of her throat like broken glass. My own blood. Varkos sold our people for mining rights and weapons. She slammed her fist into the console, cracking the screen. The rage that erupted within her was blinding. It was a white-hot fire that threatened to consume her entirely. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the station apart, rivet by rivet. We have the proof, Jack said, his voice urgent. He grabbed her arm, grounding her. Kalen, look at me. We have the proof. We can expose him. We can destroy them all. Kalen looked at him, her silver eyes swirling with violence. Before she could answer, a sound echoed from the darkness near the entrance. A slow, deliberate clapping. Kalen spun around, her hand flying to the hilt of her blade. Emerging from the shadows was a figure she knew better than her own reflection. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the ceremonial armor of the Etherean Royal Guard. He had a scar running down his left cheek, and his eyes were a warm, familiar gold. Commander Thorn. Kalen's breath caught in her throat. It was impossible. Thorn had been her personal shield. She had seen the palace collapse on top of him. She had mourned him for 3,000 nights. Kalen, the figure said, his voice thick with emotion. By the ancestors, you survived. Thorn. Kalen took a step forward, her guard dropping. Oh, I saw you fall. I crawled out just like you, Thorn said, walking toward her with open arms. I have been searching for you. I knew you wouldn't die easily. I knew my princess was too stubborn for the grave. Kalen felt tears prick her eyes. The rage vanished, replaced by a desperate, aching hope. He was alive. A piece of her home, a piece of her heart, had survived the fire. Thorn, she breathed, reaching out. Wait, Jack said sharply. He leveled his pistol at the approaching guard. Stay back. Lower your weapon, Jax. Kalen snapped, turning on him. That is my captain of the guard. He's moving wrong, Jack said, his eyes narrowed, the pistol not wavering. Look at his gait. He's favoring the wrong leg. What? You told me Thorn took a shrapnel wound to the right knee during the campaigns? Jack shouted. He's limping on the left. Thorn stopped. He looked at Jax with a sneer that looked completely wrong on his noble face. The human is paranoid, Kalen. The war changed us all. I am hurt. I'm tired. I just want to embrace my kin. Kalen looked back at Thorn. Jax's words filtered through her shock. She looked at his leg. Jax was right. But it was Thorn. She could see the sweat on his brow, the specific way his armor was dented. It's him, Jax. Come here, Thorn said, his voice dropping to a soothing purr. Let me look at you. Let me see what they did to you. He took another step. And then Kalen saw it. A flicker. Just for a nanosecond. The gold of his eyes rippled, shifting into a flat, dead black before returning to gold. It was a glitch in the biological matrix. He's a changeling. Jax yelled. The figure lunged. Thorn's face split open, the jaw unhinging as his body contorted. The familiar armor dissolved into organic, shifting flesh. His arm elongated, the bones snapping and reshaping into a jagged, serrated bone blade 3 feet long. Kalen stood paralyzed. The cognitive dissonance, seeing her friend turn into a monster, locked her muscles. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The bone blade swung toward her neck, a killing stroke that she was too heartbroken to block. A gunshot cracked through the archive. The bullet struck the changeling in the shoulder, blowing off a chunk of gray shifting matter. The creature shrieked, a sound like grinding metal, and stumbled back, its aim thrown off. The blade missed Kalen's throat by an inch, slicing through the heavy fabric of her cloak and biting deep into her shoulder. Kalen fell back, crying out in pain as blood sprayed across the floor. Jax was already moving. He fired again and again, 2 shots to the chest. The changeling roared, its form destabilizing, cycling through a dozen faces. A human woman, a Rodian mercenary, Thorn again, before it settled on a gray, faceless humanoid form. It charged Jax. Jax dropped to a slide, going under the swinging bone blade. He kicked the creature's knee, hearing a satisfying snap, but the changeling barely slowed. It backhanded him, sending him flying across the room. Jax slammed into a server rack, his pistol skittering away into the darkness. The assassin turned back to Kaelin. It loomed over her, raising the blade to finish the job. "Princess," the creature hissed, its voice a distorted mockery of thorns. "The cousin sends his regards." Kaelin looked up. She saw the monster, but she still saw the ghost of the friend it had worn. Her hand trembled on her knife. She couldn't do it. She couldn't kill the face of the man who had raised her. "Do it." Jax screamed from the floor, blood running down his chin. "It's not him." The blade came down. Jax scrambled, grabbing a loose power cable from the severed server rack. He lunged, jamming the live wire into the base of the assassin's neck. High-voltage electricity arced through the changeling's body. It convulsed violently, the organic camouflage failing completely. It thrashed, unable to break free as the current cooked its nervous system. Kaelin snapped out of her trance. The smell of burning ozone and flesh broke the spell. She saw the creature for what it was, a biological weapon sent by Varkos. She drew her knife. With a scream of pure, unadulterated fury, she drove the blade up under the creature's ribs, piercing its dual hearts. The changeling stiffened, then collapsed into a pile of gray sludge. Silence returned to the archive, heavy and suffocating. Kaelin sat on the floor, clutching her bleeding shoulder. She stared at the puddle of gray matter. She was shaking not from the cold but from the shock. It hadn't been Thorn. Thorn was dead. He was really dead. And Varkos had used his memory as a puppet to try and gut her. Jax limped over to her. He didn't say a word. He knelt down, checking the wound on her shoulder. It was deep. The bone blade had severed muscle and nicked the artery. "We have to go," Jax said gently. "Security will be here in 2 minutes." Kaelin nodded, but she didn't move. She looked at Jax, her eyes wide and hollow. I hesitated. "We'll talk about it later," Jax said. He hauled her up, wrapping his arm around her waist to support her weight. "Right now," he said, pulling her toward the exit, "we run." They made it back to the dropship just as the station's alarms began to wail, a dissonant screech that vibrated through the hull plates. Jax punched in the launch sequence with frantic speed, his fingers blurring over the console. The ship's engines roared, blasting them out of the docking ring and into the chaotic debris field of the asteroid belt before the sector patrol ships could achieve a lock. Back in the safety of hyperspace, the silence on the ship was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence of sleep, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of shock. Kaelin sat on the edge of the biobed in the small, sterile medbay. She had stripped off her cloak and the upper half of her mesh undersuit, leaving her torso bare. The wound on her shoulder was ugly, a jagged tear in her teal skin that oozed violet blood, pulsing in time with her rapid, shallow heartbeat. The bone blade of the changeling had missed the artery by millimeters, but the damage to the muscle was severe. Jax moved around the room gathering supplies, dermal regenerators, antiseptic foam, kinetic bandages. He worked with a quiet, terrifying efficiency, washing the alien blood from his hands before approaching her. He didn't look like a spy anymore. He looked like a man who had stitched up too many friends in too many dark rooms. He stood between her knees inspecting the wound. "This is going to sting," he said softly. "High-gravity antiseptic. It burns." He applied the foam. Kaelin hissed, her hands gripping the edge of the metal bed frame until the steel groaned and warped under her fingers. She didn't cry out. She stared at the blank gray wall, her jaw locked tight, refusing to show weakness. "I almost died," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the regal cadence she usually commanded. Jax focused on cleaning the cut, his brow furrowed. "You didn't." "Because of you," Kaelin corrected sharply. "I froze, Jax. I saw him. I saw Thorn, and I froze. I am a warrior. I am a mercenary who has killed for a decade. And I stood there like a frightened child and let a monster cut me because it wore a familiar face." She looked at Jax, her silver eyes filling with angry, shimmering tears. "I am weak." Jax stopped. He set the medical tool down on the tray with a deliberate clatter. He placed his hands on her knees, the warmth of his palms seeping through her skin, forcing her to look at him. "You aren't weak," he said firmly. "You are grieving. There is a difference." Kaelin shook her head, her violet hair falling over her face. "In my world they are the same. Feelings are a liability. I proved that today. If you hadn't been there—" "But I was there," Jax interrupted, his voice rising. "That is the point, Kaelin. You don't have to do this alone anymore. You don't have to be the perfect soldier every second of every day. You aren't a machine. He picked up the dermal regenerator. He began to seal the wound, the laser stitching the alien flesh back together with microscopic precision. You don't have to be strong with me, Kaylin, he whispered. I'm not the High Council. I'm just Jax. The words shattered the last of her defenses. Kaylin let out a shuddering breath, and her head dropped forward, resting against Jax's chest. She sobbed, a harsh, racking sound that had been suppressed for 10 years. She cried for Thorn, for her parents, for the girl she had been before the fire, and for the hollow, violent life she had been forced to lead. Jax held her. He didn't shush her. He didn't tell her it would be okay because that would have been a lie. He just held her, his hand stroking the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her long violet hair. He stood there as her anchor, a solid point of gravity while the storm passed. Eventually the sobbing subsided. Kaylin pulled back, wiping her face. She looked exhausted, her bioluminescence dim and flickering, but the frantic edge was gone from her eyes. Jax finished dressing the wound, taping the bandage in place. He reached for a clean cloth to wipe his hands, but Kaylin caught his wrist. Her skin was hot, the fever from the combat stims and the emotional purge radiating off her like a furnace. She looked at his hand, then up at his face. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The grief evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp intensity. She didn't want to be comforted anymore. She wanted to feel something else. She wanted to obliterate the memory of the gray sludge and the dead eyes of the changeling with something living, something real. Kaylin guided his hand from her wrist to her neck, and then down to her collarbone. She pressed his palm against her skin, right over her beating hearts. Jax, she said. The name was a command, not a question. Jax went still. Kaylin. She stood up. The movement brought her face level with his. She was taller than him by an inch, and right now she felt looming, powerful. She reached out and grabbed the front of his jumpsuit, pulling him in. Make me forget, she whispered against his lips. She kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss in the jungle, sweet and tentative. This was hungry. It was a collision. She pushed him backward until his legs hit the edge of the biobed. Your shoulder, Jax murmured against her mouth, trying to be gentle, mindful of the injury he had just stitched. I don't care about the shoulder, Kaylin growled. She shoved him down onto the bed. She straddled his lap, her legs gripping his hips with bruising force. She loomed over him, her violet hair falling like a curtain around their faces. Her chest was bare, the bandages stark white against her teal skin, the bioluminescent markings pulsing with a chaotic, rapid rhythm. She reached down to the clasps of her metallic belt, the last piece of her armor that remained. With a sharp click it fell to the floor. She sat back, exposing herself fully to him. The light in the medbay was harsh and unforgiving, hiding nothing. She didn't cover herself. She didn't shy away. She spread her arms, her silver eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and desire. This time you can look human, she said, a flush of violet coloring her cheeks. Look at all of it. Jax looked. He looked at the scars that mapped her history, the silver lines of old plasma burns and kinetic impacts. He looked at the alien grace of her curves, the way her physiology was both familiar and startlingly different. He looked at the woman who was offering him everything she had left. You are beautiful, he breathed. Kaylin made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and descended on him. They made love with a desperation that bordered on violence. It was a reclaiming. Kaylin set a rhythm that was punishing and deep. She needed to feel him everywhere. She needed the friction, the sweat, the physical proof that she was alive and that he was alive. The psychic bond flared white-hot. Jax felt her pleasure spike through his own nervous system, a feedback loop of sensation that made his vision blur. He felt the exact moment her fear dissolved into pure sensation. He didn't just touch her skin, he touched her mind. It was overwhelming, a cacophony of shared existence. When the climax hit her, she cried out his name, a raw, shattered sound that echoed in the small room. She collapsed forward, her forehead resting on his chest, her body trembling as the aftershocks rolled through her. Jax wrapped his arms around her, pulling the thermal blanket up to cover them both. They lay there in a tangle of limbs and sweat, the only sound the humming of the ship's engines in the void. A long time passed. Kaylin shifted, resting her chin on his chest. She traced the line of his jaw with one teal finger. Her eyes were clear now, the mercury calm again. I have a secret, she whispered. Jax stroked her hair, his eyes closed. I thought we were done with secrets. Not this one, she said. She pushed herself up on one elbow. Even tangled in bedsheets with her hair a mess, she looked regal. I lied to you, she said. I told you I was in exile. I told you I was running away. Aren't you? Jax asked, opening his eyes. Kalen looked at the ceiling, at the metal plates of the ship. Technically. But by the old laws of the Etherean High Court, I'm not just a survivor. Since my father and brothers are dead, I am the queen. Jax stared at her. The queen? Kalen nodded. The throne doesn't exist. The palace is ash. My people are scattered or sold. But the title? It is in the blood. It is in the biocode. She looked down at him and her expression hardened. There was a steel in her gaze that Jax had not seen before. It wasn't the coldness of the mercenary. It was the resolve of a ruler. When I saw Varkos on that screen, when I saw what he did. She paused. I realized something. I don't just want to kill him, Jax. I don't just want revenge. Wait, Jax asked softly. What do you want? Kalen's hand drifted down to her stomach as if protecting something deep inside. I want it back, she said. I want my throne. I want to tear Varkos down and sit on the seat of my ancestors. I want to rule. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. And that terrifies me. Because I don't know if I want it for justice, or for power. Jax reached up and cupped her cheek. It doesn't matter why you want it right now. What matters is what you do when you get it. Kalen leaned into his touch. And will you be there? When I am a queen and not a mercenary? Will you still stand by me then? Jax smiled, a tired, honest smile. Princess, I will stand by you until the stars burn out. Kalen kissed him softly, sealing the vow. Then we have work to do. Because taking back a kingdom is going to be much harder than stealing a spaceship. They arrived at the coordinates 3 days later. The planet of Leviathan V was a weeping sore in the galaxy. It was a world composed entirely of dying oceans, where the sea level had risen 300 feet in the last century, drowning the archipelagos and the cities built upon them. The rain here never stopped. It fell in gray, relentless curtains, hammering against the hulls of the rusted floating platforms that served as the last refuge for the population. Kalen piloted the stolen dropship through the atmospheric turbulence. The ship shook violently as they descended through the storm clouds. Below them, the ocean churned, a chaotic landscape of black waves topped with toxic white foam. There, Kalen said, pointing to a grid of lights blinking faintly in the gloom. Deep Sea Rig 9. It looks like a coffin floating in a sewer, Jax remarked, gripping the co-pilot's console. It is the only place left where loyalty still has currency, Kalen replied. They brought the ship down on the landing pad, the magnetic clamps engaging with a heavy metallic thud. The airlock hissed open to admit the smell of brine, rust, and decaying kelp. Waiting for them in the hangar bay was a figure carved from granite and regret. General Krog stood 7 feet tall, his amphibious skin the color of dried slate. He wore a ragged military coat adorned with medals from a kingdom that no longer existed. One of his eyes was natural, a piercing yellow slit. The other was a red cybernetic implant that whirred as it focused on them. General, Kalen said, stepping onto the wet deck. She did not bow. She stood tall the way he had taught her. Krog did not smile. He walked forward, his heavy boots clanging on the metal. He stopped a foot away from her, looking her up and down, noting the scars on her armor. You look like hell, princess, Krog grunted. His voice sounded like grinding stones. I have had a long decade, Krog, she replied softly. Krog turned his gaze to Jax. And this is the human pet I heard about? The spy who convinced an Etherean royal to turn traitor. I am not a pet, Jax said, stepping forward, his hand resting near his holster. And she is not a traitor. She is the only honest thing left in this war. Krog laughed, a sharp, barking sound. He has teeth. Good. You will need them. Come inside before the rain melts your skin. The interior of the rig was a labyrinth of dripping pipes and flickering halogen lights. Krog led them to a central command room where a holographic map of the sector hovered above a circular table. You are popular, Krog said, tapping a console. Look at this. A projection of a bounty listing materialized. It showed Kalen's face. The sum beneath it was staggering, 50 million credits, dead or alive. Your cousin Varkos has been busy, Krog explained, lighting a foul-smelling cigar. He has declared you a terrorist. The official story is that you are a rogue biological weapon, a failed experiment that massacred the archive staff. He has mobilized the Royal Armada. 3 battle groups are sweeping the sector. They aren't looking for a prisoner. They are looking for a corpse. Kalen stared at her own face on the projection. The lie was efficient. Varkos knew that if the galaxy thought she was a monster, no one would listen to what she had to say. We have the data, Jax said, stepping up to the table. We have proof that Varkos and the noble houses engineered the war. We have the recordings of him selling his own people for mining rights. So use it, Krog said, exhaling a plume of blue smoke. That's what I said, Jax argued, looking at Kalen. We upload it to the StellarNet. We broadcast it on every frequency. We break their narrative. No, Kalen said sharply. Her voice cut through the room. Jax turned to her, frustration evident in his posture. Why, Kalen? We have the gun in our hand. Pull the trigger. If we release that data without a plan, Kalen said, her eyes flashing silver, we do not just hurt Varkos. We destabilize the entire sector. The revelations will cause riots on 1,000 worlds. The colonies will revolt against the core worlds. The mercenaries will turn on their employers. Supply lines will collapse. Millions of innocents will starve or die in the crossfire. It will be anarchy. Anarchy is better than slavery, Jax countered. Is it? Kalen asked quietly. I have seen anarchy, Jax. I lived in the gutters of it for 10 years. It is not noble. It is just blood. They stared at each other. The impasse that had been building since the asteroid station finally hardened into a wall. Jax, the idealist willing to burn the forest to kill the parasite. Kalen, the soldier terrified of the fire she might unleash. Krog watched them, his cybernetic eye whirring. He tapped his cigar ash onto the floor. You are both right, the general rumbled. And that is why you will both lose if you do not stop fighting each other. Later that night, Krog gave them quarters in a sea dome. A room constructed entirely of reinforced transparent steel jutting out into the ocean depths. It was silent, save for the muffled pressure of millions of tons of water surrounding them. Outside the glass, the ocean was a deep, crushing black, illuminated only by the spectral drift of bioluminescent jellyfish. They floated like ghosts, pulsing with soft blue and violet light. Kalen stood by the window watching the creatures. She wore only a loose linen tunic. Jax sat on the edge of the bed watching her. You are angry with me, Kalen said, not turning around. I'm not angry, Jax replied. I'm frustrated. We have the truth, Kalen. And you are afraid to speak it. I am afraid of what comes after, she admitted. If we start a rebellion, we have to lead it. We have to be responsible for every life lost in our name. Jax stood up and walked over to her. We are already responsible. Every day Varkos stays in power, people die. Silence is a choice too. Kalen turned to look at him. Since when did a human spy become the moral compass of an Etherian queen? Since the queen saved my life and showed me that there is something worth fighting for besides money, Jax said. He reached out, taking her hand. The anger drained out of her. She stepped closer to him, invading his space, backing him up until he was leaning against the wide ledge of the windowsill. What if we survive? She asked suddenly. Jax blinked. What? What if we win? What if we kill Varkos and stop the war? What happens to us? I don't know, Jax admitted. I have, Kalen whispered. She climbed onto the windowsill, straddling his lap, the bioluminescent light framing her silhouette like a halo. In every version of the future I imagine, I am alone on a throne I hate, or I am dead. I don't know how to be anything but a weapon, Jax. You aren't a weapon, Jax said, pulling her tighter. I have seen you save a child in the rain. You are Kalen. That is enough. You make me forget I am a weapon, she breathed. She kissed him. It was slow, deep, and tasted of salty air and surrender. As they moved together, the psychic bond flared wide, no longer a trickle of emotion but a river of shared consciousness. Jax gasped as he felt her mind envelop his. He felt the cold depth of the ocean, the ancient weight of her lineage and the bright, burning center of her love for him. Jax, she whispered, her voice echoing in his head. I want to give you something. Something they cannot take away. She sat back, breaking the kiss but not the connection. She placed her hand flat against the center of his chest, directly over his heart. Her palm began to glow. It started as a warmth, then a heat, then a searing burn. Jax gritted his teeth but he did not pull away. He looked down. Her hand was turning translucent, revealing the glowing blue veins beneath. A complex geometric pattern was burning itself into his flesh. A circle intersected by 3 spears. The royal sigil of House Etheria. It is the mark of the consort, Kalen said, her voice thick with the trance. In the old days it was a death sentence. It meant your life was bound to the throne. If the queen died, the consort died. She looked into his eyes, tears streaming down her teal cheeks. I am binding you to me, Jax. I'm making you a target. I am selfish. Jax reached up, covering her burning hand with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. "Mark me," he rasped. "Do it." Kaelin cried out. The energy surged. The sigil seared into his skin, permanent and glowing with a faint internal light. The pain vanished instantly, replaced by a humming resonance. Jax felt a click in his mind like a door locking shut. He could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own. He could sense exactly where she was, how she felt, the very texture of her soul. They collapsed against each other, the ritual exhausting them both. The sigil on Jax's chest pulsed in rhythm with the markings on Kaelin's arm. They were no longer just allies. They were a dyad, a single entity in two bodies. Jax held her, running his thumb over the bioluminescent freckles on her shoulder. "We are in this together now," he whispered. "No more running." Kaelin dozed, safe in their glass bubble. Then the water turned red. A series of strobe lights began to flash in the ocean darkness outside the dome. The jellyfish scattered in panic. Jax sat up, his heart pounding. Kaelin felt his spike of adrenaline through the bond and woke instantly. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for her blade. Jax stared out the window. Shadows were moving in the water, massive, sleek shapes that did not belong to the native fauna. "Stealth marines?" Jax whispered, horror dawning on him. "They found us." Before Kaelin could answer, a muffled boom shook the sea dome. The reinforced glass groaned. A hairline fracture appeared in the center of the pane, spreading outward like a spider web. "They're breaching," Jax yelled. The glass exploded. A wall of freezing black water slammed into the room with the force of a freight train. The water didn't just flood the room, it detonated. When the reinforced glass of the sea dome shattered under the crushing pressure of the deep ocean, the Atlantic-sized wall of freezing brine hit Jax with the force of a freight train. He was thrown backward, the air driven from his lungs in a single agonizing whoosh, before he slammed into the rear bulkhead. The room instantly transformed into a vortex of swirling debris, glass shards, and freezing darkness. Jax tried to scream, but the ocean filled his mouth with the taste of salt and copper. He kicked upward, fighting the torrent, his human instincts screaming for surface, for air, for anything but the crushing black. But the water was heavy, oppressive, and filled with monsters. Through the murky chaos, illuminated by the flashing red emergency lights sealing the bulkheads, he saw them. 4 dark figures in powered aquatic armor jetted through the broken window. Their visors glowed a predatory crimson, and they moved with terrifying speed, harpoon guns raised. Kaelin was fighting. This was her element. Underwater, she moved like a selkie, twisting around a harpoon shot that left a trail of bubbles in its wake. She drove her knife into the seal of a marine's neck joint, her movements fluid and lethal. But there were too many of them. One of the marines fired a concussion net. It exploded outward, wrapping around Kaelin and pinning her to the wall. Electricity arced through the water, jagged blue spasms of voltage that bypassed her natural resistances and stunned her. Jax kicked off the wall, firing his pistol wildly into the water. The bullets, designed for atmospheric combat, lost velocity instantly, pinging uselessly off the marine's heavy armor. He swam toward her, his chest burning where the consort sigil glowed, a beacon in the dark. A hand of iron grabbed Jax by the ankle. A marine dragged him down. The last thing he saw before the water turned black with blood was Kaelin's silver eyes, wide and terrified, staring at him through the net as the sea consumed them both. The cold was absolute. Jax kicked blindly, his boots finding purchase on the slick floor, but the marine's grip was unyielding. He was being dragged into the abyss, the oxygen in his lungs burning like acid. "Jax." Her voice echoed in his skull, not a sound but a raw mental impulse screaming through the bond. He could feel her terror not for herself but for him. Jax gritted his teeth, fighting the darkness creeping into the edges of his vision. He still had his pistol. He twisted his body, fighting the immense resistance of the water, and aimed down at the shadow dragging him. He couldn't see. The murk was too thick. But he didn't need to see. He relied on the sigil burning on his chest. He closed his eyes and felt. He felt the marine's heartbeat, a cold, mechanical rhythm distinct from the chaos of the ocean. He fired. The range was point blank. The bullet struck the marine's visor, cracking the glass. The marine recoiled, the grip on Jax's ankle loosening. Jax kicked free. Logic dictated he swim for the surface. Survival dictated he flee. But Jax was human, and humans have a habit of ignoring logic when their pack is in danger. He didn't swim up. He swam for Kaelin. He reached the bulkhead. The concussion net was pulsing with lethal voltage. If he touched it, it would stop his heart. He looked at the control node anchored to the wall. He reversed his pistol, gripping the barrel like a hammer. Percussive maintenance, he thought grimly. He slammed the heavy butt of the weapon into the node. What? Twice. The casing cracked. The node sparked and died. The net went limp, drifting away like dead kelp. Kaylin fell forward, coughing water, her bioluminescence flickering weakly. She was barely conscious. Jax grabbed her harness, hauling her toward the emergency hatch. The water level was rising fast, the pressure equalizing with the ocean outside. They had seconds before the room was fully submerged. They tumbled through the hatch into the corridor just as the sea dome collapsed completely behind them with a sound like an imploding star. Jax slammed the manual lock, sealing the blast door. They collapsed on the metal grating, gasping for air, coughing up brine. The corridor was flashing red, alarms screaming in a rhythmic, deafening cycle. "We have to move," Kaylin rasped, pushing herself up. Her movements were jagged, the stun damage still lingering in her nerves. "They are inside the rig." They sprinted through the bowels of the station. The fighting was already intense. They passed bodies, General Krog's loyalists, ragtag soldiers in old uniforms, dead alongside the sleek, black-armored stealth marines of the Royal Fleet. The air smelled of ozone, burned flesh, and the metallic tang of vaporized steel. They reached the hangar bay entrance. The blast doors were buckled, glowing orange from heat. General Krog stood in the center of the breach. He was a mountain of violence. He wielded a massive rotary cannon torn from a turret mount, firing continuously into the smoke-filled corridor ahead. His coat was shredded, his cybernetic eye cracked, and blue blood soaked his chest. But he did not fall. He was holding back an entire squad of Marines single-handedly. "Get to the ship." Krog roared, not looking back, his voice booming over the roar of the cannon. "Krog!" Kaylin yelled, stepping forward. "Go!" Krog turned, revealing the ruin of his left side. A plasma grenade had taken his arm and part of his torso. He was standing on sheer will and adrenaline. "The galaxy does not need a corpse, princess," he bellowed, spinning the barrels of his cannon back toward the enemy. "It needs a queen. Fly." A volley of plasma fire erupted from the smoke. Krog staggered, his body absorbing hits that would have vaporized a lesser being. He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound, and jammed the trigger down. "For Etheria." He charged into the smoke. The explosion that followed shook the foundations of the rig. Krog had detonated the cannon's power cell. A fireball consumed the corridor, sealing the breach and burying the enemy, and the general, under tons of molten steel. Kaylin stood frozen. Her hand reached out toward the fire. Jax grabbed her arm, the grief hitting him through their bond like a physical blow. "Kaylin, we have to go. Now." She looked at him, her face a mask of ash and tears. She nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. They ran to the Wraith. The prototype frigate sat on the launch rail, its engines already humming. They scrambled up the ramp, Kaylin hitting the seal control before they even reached the cockpit. Jax jumped into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls, bypassing the pre-flight checks. Kaylin strapped into the gunnery station. "Weapons are hot. Shields to maximum. Get us out of here," she commanded. Jax slammed the throttle forward. The Wraith shot out of the underwater hangar, tearing through the ocean at supersonic speeds. The water boiled around their hull. They breached the surface in a shower of spray and steam, rocketing into the storm-choked sky of Leviathan V. The moment they cleared the cloud layer, the proximity alarm screamed. The sky was not empty. It was a wall of steel. 3 battle groups hung in orbit. Hundreds of fighters swarmed like angry wasps. And in the center of the formation sat the Sovereign, a dreadnought 5 miles long, bristling with turbolasers. It was a city of death painted in the royal colors of gold and obsidian. "They're locking onto us," Kaylin said, her voice deadly calm. 500 distinct target locks. Jax looked at the sensor board. It was impossible. They were 2 people in a stolen ship against the might of an empire. "We can't fight them," Jax said. "We don't have to fight them," Kaylin replied. "We just have to survive them." Jax looked at the console. A crazy, desperate idea formed in his mind. It was the kind of idea that only a human, a species that specialized in breaking things to see how they worked, could come up with. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a data chip, the one containing the raw code he had salvaged from the archive, modified with his own aggressive algorithms. "I have an idea," Jax said. "It is stupid and it probably won't work." "Do it," Kaylin said without hesitation. Jax slotted the chip into the comms array. He began to type, his fingers blurring. "I'm uploading the Hydra virus." I'm piggybacking it on their own targeting frequency. If I can handshake with the sovereign central AI, I can crash their tactical grid. Do it fast, human, Kalen warned. Missiles inbound. Space lit up. Hundreds of streaks of fire raced toward them. Jax pushed the Wraith into a corkscrew dive, the inertial dampeners whining in protest. Explosions blossomed around them, shaking the ship violently. A heavy laser blast grazed their port wing. Shields at 40%. Kalen yelled. Connection established, Jax muttered, sweat stinging his eyes. Uploading? Come on. Come on. He hit the enter key. For a second nothing happened. Then the chaos in the sky shifted. The formation of the enemy fighters broke. Ships began to drift, their engines cutting out. The targeting locks on the Wraith vanished from the board. On the view screen, the lights of the massive fleet flickered and dimmed as the virus ate through their command protocols, flooding their systems with junk data and feedback loops. Their comms are down, Jax breathed, staring at the screen. They're blind. They can't coordinate. Kalen unbuckled her harness. She stood up, her eyes fixed on the massive dreadnought in the center of the paralyzed fleet. Take us in, she commanded. What? Jax spun his chair around. Dock with the Sovereign, Kalen said. While their defenses are down. Are you insane? Jax asked. That is the flagship. There are 10,000 soldiers on that boat. And one traitor. I am not running anymore, Kalen said. Jax, I am finishing this. Jax looked at her. He felt the resolve in her mind, a cold, immovable object. He knew he couldn't talk her out of it. He turned back to the controls, banking the shuttle toward the main hangar deck of the dreadnought. Hold on. The Wraith wove through the drifting, confused fleet. Jax guided them into the massive hangar bay of the Sovereign, the containment fields flickering due to the virus. They slammed down on the deck, the landing gears screeching against the polished metal. Smoke filled the cockpit. Kalen moved to the airlock, grabbing her magnetic rifle and checking the charge on her kinetic blade. Jax was right behind her, checking his pistol. Kalen stopped at the airlock door. She turned to face him. Stay here, she said. Jax stopped. Excuse me? Keep the engines running, she ordered. Keep the virus cycling. If the system reboots, we are dead. I can set it on auto, Jax argued, reaching for the door panel. I am coming with you. No, Kalen said. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest, right over the sigil she had burned there. This is a blood feud, Jax. By Aetherian law, I must face him alone. If anyone else interferes, his claim to the throne stands valid in the eyes of the High Council. I have to kill him in single combat. I don't care about your laws. Jax shouted, fear spiking through the bond. He will kill you. He might, Kalen said softly. But if you follow me, you destroy my legitimacy. You destroy the future we are fighting for. She leaned in and kissed him, quick, hard, and final. Don't follow me, Jax. That is a royal command. She hit the override on the door. It hissed open. She stepped out onto the hangar deck. Before Jax could follow, she shot the control panel on the inside of the airlock. The door slammed shut, sparks showering from the ruined circuitry. Kalen. Jax screamed, pounding on the blast door. Kalen did not look back. She turned toward the squad of stormtroopers rushing across the hangar deck. She raised her rifle, her face grim. She began the long walk to the throne. The corridors of the Sovereign were not built for war, they were built for intimidation. But Kalen didn't care about architecture. She moved through the gilded hallways like a natural disaster. She didn't fight like a mercenary anymore. She fought like a demon possessed by a decade of ghosts. She used every dirty trick, every brutal maneuver, and every ounce of rage she had stored in the dark corners of her soul. When a squad of Royal Marines tried to block the lift, she didn't slow down. She used the momentum of her sprint to slide under their plasma fire, severing knee joints and shattering faceplates with the butt of her empty rifle. She breached the lift, riding it straight to the command deck. The doors hissed open, revealing the bridge. It was a vast, cathedral-like space dominated by a panoramic viewport that showed the paralyzed fleet drifting against the stars like broken toys. In the center of the room sat the throne, a high-backed chair of obsidian and velvet. Varko stood there. He was waiting for her. He wore armor of polished gold, untarnished and purely ceremonial. His cape was velvet, his hair perfectly coiffed. In one hand he held a crystal glass of wine. In the other, a long, elegant energy saber that hummed with a lethal, high-pitched frequency. "Cousin," Varko said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "You are late. I expected you 10 years ago." Kaelin stepped onto the bridge. Her armor was battered, smoking and stained with blue blood. She threw her empty magnetic rifle to the floor with a metallic clang that echoed like a gavel strike. "The throne is mine, Varkos," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Get out of my chair." Varkos chuckled, taking a sip of wine. "So dramatic. You always were. Even as a child you took everything so seriously. Duty. Honor. The people." He threw the glass aside. It shattered on the floor, splashing crimson liquid across the pristine white tiles. "Look at them, Kaelin," he said, gesturing to the stars and the fleet beyond. "They don't want honor. They want stability. They want to be told who to hate and who to serve. I gave them a purpose. I gave them a war. And you want to give them what? Freedom?" He sneered. "I want to give them the truth," Kaelin said, drawing her kinetic blade. The purple energy hummed to life, a stark contrast to his gold. "The truth?" Varkos laughed, descending the steps of the dais. "The truth is that our family was weak. Father was going to sell our heritage for peace with the humans. I saved us. I made us gods again." "You made us butchers," Kaelin spat. She charged. She closed the distance in a heartbeat, swinging her blade in a lethal arc aimed at his neck. Varkos parried effortlessly, his golden saber clashing against her purple blade with a crack of thunder. He was fast, faster than she remembered. He moved with the fluid elegance of a dancer, deflecting her strikes with contemptuous ease. Where Kaelin fought with the jagged, desperate energy of a survivor, Varkos fought with the refined, perfect forms of a master duelist. "You are sloppy," Varkos taunted, riposting with a thrust that grazed her ribs, scorching the metal of her armor. "You have been fighting in the mud with mercenaries too long. You have forgotten the forms." Kaelin gritted her teeth, ignoring the pain. She spun, lashing out with a kick, but Varkos caught her boot and threw her backward. She skidded across the polished floor, slamming hard into a navigation console. "Is this the best the resistance has to offer?" Varkos sneered, walking toward her. "A broken princess and her human pet? Don't talk about him," Kaelin snarled. She scrambled up, attacking again. This time she abandoned the royal forms entirely. She fought dirty. She feinted high, then swept low. She used her gauntlet to block his saber, the metal sizzling and melting, and headbutt him in the face. Varkos stumbled back, blood trickling from his nose. His smile vanished. "Enough," he hissed. He unleashed a flurry of blows, driving her back. His technique was flawless, overwhelming her defenses. He struck her shoulder, reopening the wound from the asteroid station. He slashed her thigh. He battered her defense until her arm went numb. With a massive overhead strike, he shattered her kinetic blade. The hilt exploded in her hand, sending her flying backward. She landed hard at the foot of the throne, weaponless and broken. Varkos loomed over her, the tip of his saber hovering inches from her throat. "You are too soft, Kaelin," he said, his voice dripping with pity. "You fell in love with a human. You let your heart make you weak. That is why you will die and I will rule forever." Kaelin looked up at him, gasping for breath. She looked past the saber, straight into his eyes. "My heart isn't weak," she whispered. "It is the only thing that is real." Varkos sneered. "Pathetic. Still believing in fairy tales." He raised the saber for the killing stroke. The blast door to the bridge exploded. It wasn't hacked open. It wasn't overridden. It was blown off its hinges with shaped charges. Through the smoke and twisted metal, a figure emerged. Jack stood there. He held his pistol in one hand and a submachine gun he had looted from a guard in the other. He was bleeding from a head wound, his jumpsuit was torn, and he looked like he had walked through hell to get there. But his eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying focus. "Get away from her," Jax roared. He didn't wait for a reply. He opened fire. Varkos spun around, his saber flashing as he deflected the bullets. The energy blade vaporized the rounds, but the sheer volume of fire forced him to backpedal. "Guards!" Varkos screamed. 4 elite Praetorian guards emerged from the shadows of the throne room, their pikes crackling with energy. They charged Jax. Jax didn't flinch. He dropped the empty submachine gun and drew a flashbang grenade from his belt. He pulled the pin with his teeth and bowled it toward them. The grenade detonated with a blinding white flash. The guards staggered, blinded and deafened. Jax moved in. This was the Death Worlder in his element. He shot the first guard in the throat joint. He slid under the pike of the second, jamming his pistol into the armor gap at the armpit and firing point blank. He was a whirlwind of human violence, efficient, brutal, and utterly lacking in honor. Kaelin watched him, her heart swelling. He had disobeyed her. He had come for her. Varkos realized his guards were falling. Roaring in frustration, he turned his attention back to the human. He leaped over the navigation console, closing the distance to Jax in a single bound. Jax raised his pistol, but Varkos sliced the weapon in half with a flick of his wrist. He grabbed Jax by the throat, lifting him off the ground. "So this is the pet," Varkos snarled, tightening his grip. "I am going to crush his windpipe, Kaelin. And then I am going to make you watch as I burn his corpse." Jax clawed at the golden gauntlet, his face turning purple, his legs kicking uselessly. Jax's eyes met Kaelin's. Through the bond she felt his agony, his fading consciousness. But she also felt his love. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was only afraid of leaving her alone. Kaelin looked at her shattered blade. It was useless. She looked at her armor. The power cells were drained, flashing red. She had one option left. She scrambled to her feet. She bypassed the safety protocols on her chest piece, the main reactor core for her armor. She routed every ounce of remaining power, life support, shields, propulsion, into her right gauntlet. The gauntlet began to scream, glowing white-hot. The heat seared her skin, burning her arm, but she didn't feel it. "Varkos!" Kaelin screamed. Varkos turned, still holding Jax. Kaelin didn't attack him with a weapon. She attacked him with herself. She launched herself across the gap, driving her glowing fist forward like a spear. Varkos tried to bring his saber up, but he was too slow. Kaelin's fist slammed into his chest. The overloaded energy discharged all at once. It punched through his golden armor, through his ribs, and out his back in a beam of pure concentrated plasma. Varkos's eyes went wide. He dropped Jax. He looked down at the hole in his chest, at Kaelin's hand buried inside him. "But," he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. "The laws." "I am the law," Kaelin whispered, her face inches from his. She ripped her hand free. Varkos crumpled. He fell backward, sliding down the steps of the dais, dead before he hit the floor. The silence on the bridge was absolute for a heartbeat. Then the ship groaned. The discharge from Kaelin's armor hadn't just killed Varkos. It had destabilized the containment field of the throne room's localized reactor. Alarms began to scream, a different sound this time. Critical failure. Core breach imminent. Kaelin fell to her knees, clutching her burned arm. Jax crawled over to her, gasping for air, rubbing his bruised throat. "Kaelin," he rasped. He reached her, pulling her into his arms. She collapsed against him, too weak to stand. Her armor was dead weight now, a tomb of metal. Jax looked around. The bridge was locked down. Blast shutters were descending over the exits. The console lights were turning a terminal red. "We have to get back to the Wraith," Jax said, trying to lift her. Kaelin shook her head weakly. "Too late. The bulkheads are sealed. The core goes in 30 seconds. Jax looked at the blast doors. She was right. They were trapped. He slumped back against the side of the dais, pulling Kaelin onto his lap. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against his chest. "We won," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "You did it. You won." "We won," Kaelin echoed softly. The shaking intensified. The floor began to buckle. Fire erupted from the ventilation shafts. The Sovereign was dying, and it was taking them with it. Kaelin reached up, touching Jax's face with her good hand. She traced the line of his jaw, his lips, the scar over his eye. "If we die," Kaelin whispered, her thumb brushing his cheek, "I want your face to be the last thing I see." Jax smiled, tears spilling from his eyes. "I'm right here, princess. I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and lingering, ignoring the explosions tearing the ship apart around them. They held onto each other, the psychic bond flaring one last time, merging their minds into a single point of light in the encroaching dark. The world turned white. Jax expected nothingness. He expected the void. Instead, he felt a lurch, a sickening, twisting sensation of being pulled inside out. The roar of the explosion vanished instantly, replaced by the hum of a containment field. He opened his eyes. They were not on the bridge of the Sovereign. They were on a transporter pad, a rough, industrial platform that smelled of ozone and cheap incense. Kaelin was still in his arms, unconscious but breathing. Jax looked up, bewildered. Surrounding them were a dozen figures. They were motley, heavily armed, wearing mismatched armor painted with the crest of House Etheria, but painted in red, the color of the Resistance. A large alien with 4 arms and a pirate's eye patch stepped forward, lowering a heavy blaster. He looked at Kaelin, then at the dead Varkos's blood on her gauntlet. He grinned, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "Nice timing," the pirate captain grunted. "We grabbed your signatures just as the reactor blew. That was a hell of a fireworks show." Jax blinked, his brain struggling to catch up. Who are you?" The captain holstered his weapon and bowed, a clumsy, theatrical gesture. "Captain Vance of the Void Shark. At your service. We are the Free Fleet, loyalists to the crown." He looked at the unconscious Kalen with reverence. "We heard the Queen was back. We figured she might need a ride." Jax looked down at Kalen. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck, feeling the steady, strong pulse of her life. He laughed, a shaky, hysterical sound that turned into a sob of relief. "Yeah," Jax whispered. "She needs a ride." Through the viewport of the pirate ship, the wreckage of the Sovereign burned like a new sun, lighting up the dark, while the Void Shark turned its engines toward the deep black, carrying the Queen and her consort into the unknown. The Outlaw Quadrant was a graveyard of stars, a sector of space where the nebulas hung thick and red like arterial spray. It was a place where ghosts went to disappear. Kalen and Jax had become ghosts. They drifted on a stolen freighter, a rust bucket jump ship named the Drifter that Jax had bartered for with the pirates before they parted ways. The Void Shark had carried them away from the battle, but Kalen had refused to stay with the rebels. She knew that if she remained, she would become the figurehead they desperately wanted. They would put a sword in her hand and ask her to carve out a new empire on the bones of the old one. She was done with empires. Inside the cramped cockpit of the Drifter, the air smelled of recycled coffee and old conduit grease. Jax sat at the comm station, his face illuminated by the blue glow of a dozen holographic screens. He looked older. The gray at his temples had spread, but his eyes were clear, devoid of the haunted look he had carried when they first met. Kalen stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. The touch was casual, but the connection it sparked was profound. The psychic sigil on Jax's chest hummed with a low, steady warmth that resonated with the bioluminescent patterns on Kalen's skin. "Is it ready?" Kalen asked, her voice soft. Jax hesitated, his finger hovering over the encryption key. "Once I send this, there is no going back. The data from the archive. The proof of Varkos's conspiracy. It will hit every news feed, every planetary relay, every datapad from the core worlds to the outer rim. It will burn everything down." He looked up at her. "It will be chaos." "Let it burn," Kalen said. Jax pressed the key. Transmission complete. For a moment, the galaxy was silent. Then the chaos began. They watched the feeds. It started as a ripple. Confusion on the news anchors' faces as their teleprompters were hijacked by the raw data. Then came the shock. Images of Varkos shaking hands with human warmongers. Audio recordings of the High Council ordering the liquidation of refugee colonies. Financial ledgers showing that the 50-year war was nothing more than a balance sheet for the organ trade. Within hours, the ripple became a tsunami. On Centauri Prime, millions of workers downed their tools and marched on the governor's palace. In the shipyards of the Royal Fleet, mutinies erupted as soldiers realized they had been dying for profit, not honor. Kalen watched a feed from her home world's capital. Statues of Varkos were being toppled, their golden heads smashing against the pavement. "You could go back," Jax said quietly. "They are chanting your name. Listen to them. They are calling for the true queen." "If I go back, I have to rule them," Kalen said. "I have to execute the traitors. I have to suppress the riots. I would become Varkos with a different face." She turned away from the screen. "Turn it off." Jax killed the feed. The cockpit plunged into shadow. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We disappear," Kalen said. "I have given them the truth. That is the only gift a queen can give." 6 months later, they found the moon of Oda. It was a small, insignificant rock in the farthest reaches of the Outlaw Quadrant. It had no strategic value, no mines, no ruins. It had only vast rolling plains of red dust that supported a hardy purple-leafed grain called kale root, and a sky that turned a bruised shade of lavender at twilight. It was perfect. They bought a plot of land using credits Jax had skimmed from a forgotten account. They gave the magistrate fake names. He was Ty, a mechanic. She was Kira, a spacer looking for quiet. They began to build. Jax used his engineering knowledge to construct a homestead from salvaged hull plating. Kalen, the warrior princess, learned to farm. It was a comedy of errors at first. She broke 3 hoes in the first week because she gripped them like battle axes. But slowly, the rhythm of the land seeped into her. She learned patience. She learned that life could not be forced, it had to be nurtured. But peace was a restless thing. 3 months after they settled, the slavers came. A gang of Zorgan raiders riding heavy hoverskiffs descended on the neighboring farm to steal the harvest and, if the mood struck them, children. Kaylin was in the field when she saw the smoke. Jax, working in the barn, felt her shift from farmer to soldier in a heartbeat through the bond. He ran out, wiping grease from his hands. "We can't," he warned. "If you expose yourself, if you use your abilities, the rumors will start." Kaylin looked at him. Her silver eyes were hard. "They have children, Ty." Jax sighed, knowing he had lost the argument before it began. He went back into the barn and returned with a heavy wrench and a concealed blaster pistol. "No armor," he warned. "And no glowing." Kaylin smirked. "I will be a shadow." They moved in on foot. The Zorgans were sloppy, used to terrifying farmers, not elite operatives. Kaylin struck from the flank. She didn't kill them, that would draw too much attention. She dismantled them. She broke knees. She disarmed them with terrifying efficiency. Jax provided overwatch, firing single, suppressed shots that shattered the engines of the hoverskiffs. When the raid leader tried to whip the neighbor, Kaylin caught his wrist and flipped him face-first into the dirt. She whispered into his ear, "Tell your friends that Dust Creek is protected." The raiders fled. The neighbors stared at Kaylin, wondering who she really was. But Kaylin just dusted off her tunic and said, "Just a farmer." That night, the adrenaline took a long time to fade. Kaylin stood by the window of their bedroom. She turned to a heavy satchel she kept under the floorboards. It contained the only remnants of her past life. Her hands trembled as she lifted an object out. It was a crown. Not of gold, but of rare, translucent crystal from the depths of her home world's ocean. It was jagged, beautiful, and sharp. She stripped off her tunic and stood naked in the firelight. The bioluminescent markings on her skin pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic blue. She placed the crown on her head. For a moment she stood taller. She was the queen of the Etherians. She was the commander of fleets. She was the last of her line. The door opened. Jack stood there. He saw the crown catching the orange glow of the flames. He saw the way she held her head. Kaylin turned to him. A blush, dark violet, rose to her cheeks. She raised a hand to cover the glow of the royal sigil on her sternum, a reflex from a lifetime of hiding. But then she dropped it. "Don't look human," she teased, her voice thick with emotion. Jax walked across the room. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of the crystal crown, then moving down to cup her face. "Too late," he whispered. "I have been looking at you since the moment you nearly killed me in the rain." He kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of war. It was a conversation. It tasted of the red dust and the peace they had carved out of the rock. Kaylin sighed into his mouth. As they moved together, the crystal crown slipped from her head and fell onto the pillow beside them. Neither of them noticed. Kaylin looked up at him, her eyes glowing softly. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," Jax replied, brushing a strand of violet hair from her forehead. "I can feel it." They fell asleep tangled together, the former queen and the retired spy, while the crystal crown lay on the pillow, a relic of a past that could no longer hurt them. 5 years later. The sun on Oda was setting, painting the sky in streaks of violently beautiful orange and purple. Jax sat on the porch, whittling a piece of driftwood. He looked content. The lines on his face were from laughter now, not stress. Kaylin walked up the path from the fields, carrying a basket of vegetables. "Dinner is going to be late," she said. "The irrigation pump is acting up again." Jax smiled. "I'll fix it in the morning. Come sit." Kaylin sat beside him on the swing bench, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Where is Zara?" Jax pointed with his knife toward the tall grass at the edge of the field. A child was running through the purple stalks. She was 4 years old, wild and fast. She had Jax's dark hair, messy and wind-blown, and Kaylin's teal skin, though it was a softer, paler shade. She was chasing a fire beetle, laughing as it buzzed just out of reach. She tripped, tumbled into the dirt, and immediately scrambled back up, undeterred. "She has your stubbornness," Jax noted. "And your lack of coordination," Kaylin countered. The child stopped. She turned toward the porch, sensing them watching her. She waved, a wide, toothy grin on her face. As the twilight deepened, the first stars began to blink into existence above. And as the light faded, the child's eyes began to glow. They were not silver like Kaylin's, nor brown like Jax's. They were a brilliant, swirling gold, a new color, something that had never existed before. "Look," Kaylin whispered. "She is lighting up," Jax said softly. The girl spun around in the field, her eyes leaving trails of golden light in the air, a living spark in the vast emptiness of the outlaw quadrant. Kaelin reached for Jax's hand. She felt the sigil on his chest, warm and steady. She thought of the war. She thought of the millions of lives she could have ruled. She thought of the cold, empty throne. Then she looked at the man beside her and the child playing in the dirt. A child who would never know the sound of orbital bombardment. "Don't look, human," Kaelin whispered, squeezing his hand, repeating the words that had started it all. Jax looked at her, then at their daughter, and finally at the stars above. "I am looking," he said. "And it is beautiful. And that, my friends, is the chronicle of the Ghost Queen and the spy who stole her heart. It's a reminder that sometimes the strongest weapon in the galaxy isn't a plasma cannon or a kinetic blade. It's the choice to walk away from power and build something real in the dust." If you enjoyed this tale from the archives, please smash that like button and subscribe to Echoes of Sci-Fi. We have countless more stories of humanity's journey through the stars waiting to be told. Check out the playlist on your screen now for more tales of Deathworlders confusing aliens with their stubbornness. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars and remember, even in the darkest void, the human spirit, and a little bit of sass, shines the brightest.